Happy Friday. Welcome to another episode of BrainScratch. I'm John Lorden. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Today's episode, we're looking into a case suggested by a big supporter of the YouTube true crime community. Thank you, retired Sergeant Melinda, for all of your support of numerous channels here on YouTube. But she also reached out to me and said, John, I've got this case. We need to raise exposure to it. And when I went looking into it, I could see why. This is a case where police are being extremely tight-lipped. Details, very, very few. But has a podcast kind of spilled the beans on this case? Possibly. Let's dive into it together and learn more about it, starting with where it happens. With a quick stop at Wikipedia, we're going to learn about Texarkana, Arkansas. Texarkana is a city in the U.S. state of Arkansas and the county seat of Miller County on the southwest border of the state. The city is located across the state line from its twin city of Texarkana, Texas. The city has a total area of 41.9 square miles, fairly big area, and also pretty good sized population. As of the census of 2016, there were over 30,000 people living there. And this is a street called Garland Avenue. Looks like a nice, quiet-looking neighborhood. Unfortunately, this is where a murder would take place. And who is it that was killed? This man, Scott Roberts. Let's learn a little bit about him over at legacy.com. Michael Scott Roberts was born March 6th, 1975 in Texarkana, Texas. Scott is survived by his beloved son, Jet, his loving parents, John and Betty, his brother, Sean, and numerous other family members, nieces and nephews, aunts and uncles. The only thing Scott loved more than flying was his son, Jet. And yeah, in case you didn't notice, I think on that picture, yeah, we've got a plane behind him and, of course, his son's name. So this is a man that has had a fascination with airplanes. From what I hear, it actually started at a pretty young age. He went off to space camp. It was kind of always a dream of his to be a pilot. Scott had been a pilot for 9 years, most recently flying for Wholesale Electric Company. Scott graduated from Texas A&M University, Texarkana with a bachelor's degree and also held numerous certificates and licenses. Scott's personal relationship with the Lord and his faith were very important to him and had grown stronger as a member of Heritage Church. I've looked through some of his Facebook postings, and I could say that seems pretty clear. There's some posts where he's just talking about what an amazing sermon they had today. Scott had an adventurous spirit and loved to travel. His hobbies included biking, golfing. He was also very proud of his golf cart. I've seen numerous pictures of that. Scuba diving, baseball games, and spending time at his land on the river. And I believe he referred to his land as Big Sky. I know there's weird characters. It looks like this text got lifted from another website and some of the characters got swapped. So this is the Facebook account for Scott Roberts. And I know his first name is Michael, but everything that I'm seeing after this is really just referring to him as Scott Roberts. So we're going to go ahead and keep going with that. Even his Facebook page is Scott Roberts. So we can see here, it's kind of a simple profile. It does mention that he's a pilot at Wholesale Electrical Supply. From what I understand, this is kind of being a private pilot, essentially, for the family that owned that company. And he had done some kind of private charter work like that recently. Work and education, I think we touched on it already. Yeah, it doesn't even have his college experience in here. For places lived, it's only noting Texarkana. Under the family and relationships section, we see he is single. He was previously married. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. There was a divorce. And the only family member he has listed here is Caitlin Kinder. I can tell you from looking at his account, he's got a lot more family here on Facebook. But Caitlin also will be coming up a little bit later as we get into the details here. But let's go ahead and learn about what happened. And this rolls back to 6 years ago this weekend. I'm actually posting this video on the same day that 6 years ago, we believe Scott was actually shot in his home. TAPD, that's the Texarkana Police Department, investigating homicide, and this article is titled July 3rd, 2015. TAPD released the following statement. Currently, Texarkana, Arkansas detectives are working diligently to determine suspect information involving the recent homicide of Michael Scott Roberts, which occurred, now here they're saying last Friday, July 3rd, 2015. From the details I've been able to gather and seeing numerous versions of this story, they made the discovery of his body, I believe, on July 3rd, but we believe the shooting actually happened the day before that. So that would be July 2nd, Thursday, 2015. It occurred at his residence on Garland Street. At this time, there's no further information to release on the case. Unfortunately, a lot of the updates we're going to see from law enforcement, very concise, very controlled, not a whole lot of detail, but we're going to share everything we can out there to try to help with this. According to TAPD Public Information Officer Corporal Christy Bennett, officers responded to a 911 call in the 1800 block of Garland Avenue Friday at approximately 11:30 a.m. on a report of a possible suicide. So, they enter. There's gunshot wounds. It's a family member. It's actually his brother that winds up finding him. It's interesting because according to some of the details that we're going to hear, I don't know that it looked like a suicide right off the bat. I'm not sure where that determination came into play, but that's what's being reported through the public information officer. Patrol officers arriving on scene found a deceased man inside the home, later identified as 40-year-old Michael Scott Roberts, with what appeared to them to be gunshot wounds, plural, to the body, said Bennett. Officers at the scene requested the Criminal Investigation Division send the crime scene unit and investigators to the residence. And here we've got a picture of it actually roped off and the front door being secured there. The body has been sent to the Arkansas State Crime Lab for an autopsy. Continuing over at Texarkana Today, txktoday.com, we find out that he is a divorced father of one, loved to fly airplanes, and made his living working as a private pilot. Police are asking that anyone with information come forward, and that's something that's been consistent over the past 6 years. Whenever police do comment on this case, they're also putting out a very big message of, we need information. We need the person that has that info to call in to us. Of course, as always, we're going to have the contact information that you need in the description box down below if you do happen to have some info that can help on this case. Police have released few details about the crime other than Roberts, 40, died of multiple gunshot wounds. A possible motive for the murder hasn't surfaced. Investigators won't disclose the caliber of bullets recovered from Roberts' body or say how many times he was shot. Like I said, very tight-lipped on this. Thankfully, there is an article that is put out over at ktbs.com. It has since disappeared from the internet, but thanks to the Wayback Machine, we're able to pull it back up here. The body of Michael Scott Roberts was found Thursday morning in his house in the 1800 block of Garland Street. See, so here, I'm having trouble even trying to keep these timelines together. Here, they're saying he was found on Thursday morning. Thursday morning would have been July 2nd. I don't know. Police say a family member of Roberts called 911 from his home after going to check on him when he didn't answer the phone. When officers arrived, they began the investigation. They discovered it was not a suicide, but it was in fact a homicide, said Christy Bennett. She's the police spokesperson. Bennett says they don't believe any items were missing from the house. So, of course, looking into a case like this, one of the things we're always wondering, what is the motive? What's the reason for this happening? And to know that it doesn't seem like there's any items missing from the house, robbery as a motive seems to kind of go out the window. She says Roberts appeared to have died of multiple gunshot wounds. Longtime friends of Roberts say he was a good, kind-hearted friend who would help anyone and did not deserve what happened to him. And if you look through his Facebook page and look through the comments of his friends and family, you'll see several people remembering different times that he stepped up for them or stepped up to help them in significant ways. Bennett says an autopsy report has concluded that he was the victim of a homicide. And I don't know, really, in terms of the autopsy report, the only other questions I would have are, was there a struggle or were there signs of a struggle? Is there any abrasions to him or anything like that to make it look like there was a fight of some kind? I don't know how helpful the autopsy report information being released publicly would be for a case of this nature. We're talking multiple gunshot wounds, guy found in his home. But even with that, we don't have a lot of details, like what room. And we're having trouble even pinning the day, because now we're hearing it was either the 3rd. I mean, one report is saying that the shooting happened on the 3rd. I'm almost positive that's not true. I believe it happened on the morning of the 2nd. But here they're saying he was actually found on the morning of the 2nd, which I don't think can necessarily work with the timelines that we're going to be talking about. But obviously just a bit of confusion around some of this case. But let's go ahead and continue and see if we can clear it up. Reward grows. So we jump to about 6 months after the fact, and the family has been working, trying to figure out some way to help entice someone to pick up that phone. Roberts' family and friends have raised over $10,000 through a GoFundMe account for a reward for information leading to an arrest in the murder. That amount is in addition to a $1,000 Crime Stoppers offer for tips in the case. According to a probable cause affidavit and interviews with Texarkana Police Corporal Christy Bennett, family members found Roberts dead. He had been shot multiple times. Investigators need the public's help to solve the murder. And I don't know if that has really changed up till this point. I'm kind of hoping there will be some new articles that spin up this weekend about this case. I'm kind of also hoping that law enforcement will start releasing just a little bit of information to help. And, maybe in some way putting this video out with the information that we found from a podcast that did some investigative work on this. Maybe that'll be a reason for law enforcement to kind of square up the story a little bit, or at least, if there's bad information in the podcast that we're going to be talking about, like put out something to say, hey, there's this information that's floating around there. We can tell you this part's not true. This part's not true. But really just something helpful in terms of help us ratchet down the time frame, so that people that live in the area can kind of search those memory banks or say, did I have a reason to be in that area on that particular day at that particular time? Do I remember anything odd about that? Because everything is just, it's really tough. The details on this case are very, very loose from the major media perspective. We are asking that anyone who had any communication with Mr. Roberts in the hours, days, or weeks before his death contact our department, Bennett said. We are actively working this case and following up on leads. We want justice for Mr. Roberts and his family. Bennett said investigators want to talk to anyone who had contact with Roberts. A seemingly inconsequential detail might help break the case. And it's interesting because with the approach, and especially the way this is phrased, it seems like they're really trying to figure out personal connectivity around him. They seem to think this is someone fairly close to him in some way, because they're looking for information about people that have interacted with him leading up to that. If this was a situation where they thought, he's a guy that kind of liked to dress nice, maybe someone sees him at a coffee shop and follows him home and goes in the door, right after he lets himself home. And then obviously we know it's not a robbery, but if there's some other motivation for some stranger to follow you home, it's pretty clear that that's not the avenue of investigation they're taking here. Seems to me like they're really trying to look into his personal life. And I think once we review all this information in today's video, I think you're going to agree it's probably a good investigative approach. So we push forward 1 year anniversary of Pilot's death. Roberts' brother found his lifeless body a year ago. The murder remains unsolved. We grieve with the Roberts family and hope that the one lead needed to solve this case happens soon, says Christy Bennett in a news release. We know that someone knows something, and however insignificant the person may feel the information is, we implore you to come forward and share it with us. We've sought assistance from the FBI Little Rock and the Texarkana office, as well as a retired Texas Ranger homicide investigator who spent his entire career investigating homicides and now spends his time as a consultant. Good to hear that they're also reaching out for help, pulling on a consultant, reaching out to the FBI. From what I understand, if the details from the podcast are accurate, this is a tough crime scene. We don't have a lot of physical evidence left behind at all. Roberts' murder is the only unsolved murder on the books in Texarkana, Arkansas, Bennett said. Roberts was shot multiple times, and police don't believe theft was a motive. Bennett said, "We won't give up." And as kind of expected with a case of this nature, time is passing. Once we get past the 1-year anniversary, families getting frustrated. And we have this article over at texarkanafyi.com talking about that. Family getting disappointed with progress of TAPD murder investigation. This was released on September 8th, 2016. His family has questions and are growing more and more disappointed with the progress of the investigation. Optimism was high in the beginning of the investigation that the murderer would be found quickly. However, as time goes on, the family is beginning to grow frustrated with the lack of communication with investigators. We spoke to Scott's brother, Sean. I do believe this is the brother that found him. I'm very disappointed in the way TAPD has handled this case. In the early stages of the investigation, we were kept abreast of any updates or progress on the case. We were assured by TAPD that the family would be updated on a regular basis. That has been further from the truth. If we want to know what's being done, we either have to call or schedule a meeting with TAPD. They never take the initiative. I understand that certain information does not need to be leaked in a case such as this, but an occasional call or email updating the status of the investigation is not much to ask for. For me, it's hard to argue at that point. And we talk about this on the channel frequently, and I'm sure investigators don't feel great. I mean, think about being on that side of it. You are working this case. No leads are developing. The phone has stopped ringing. But, I mean, do you set a reminder for yourself once a week about, hey, you know, I got to call the family? And what do you say when you do call them? We're still looking into it. We're still looking into things. Can you say that week after week after week after week? It really makes me think about that aspect of having some type of case manager, someone that is responsible for doing that type of contact. And maybe the expectation would be a little different if it was a case manager that was kind of a go-between for the family and the investigators. Because, you know, then the family talking to the case manager might not expect, oh, this is the one that's actually picking up the phone, actually shaking the trees, trying to figure out what's going on in this case. I don't know. There's obviously no perfect way to handle these cases, but it is sad to hear that families feel like this, you know, feel that they're being left behind, particularly when you're talking about it being the only homicide on the books in the area. I mean, that's got to kind of amp it a little bit. Without getting into the specifics of the investigation, in the beginning, the family had full faith in TAPD. We got the impression that the case would be solved sooner rather than still unsolved. I think they skipped a few important details thinking that someone would come forward with information early in the investigation. That hasn't turned out in their favor. The family was assured that no stone would be left unturned, but when we asked for certain things to be looked at or examined, we are told that it is either irrelevant to the case or they make us feel like we are insulting their intelligence. We get the usual statement, we are working hard to solve the case. See, and that kind of goes back to my example. Like, you can't call this family every week and say, we are working hard to solve the case, because that's also going to grate at them, just as it has for Sean here. Well, if they claim no stone is being unturned, why haven't certain things that the family has requested TAPD to check up on not been done? They should be working with the family and not against the family. Hopefully, one day, justice is served for Scott. And I totally echo that sentiment. We all want justice served for Scott as well. Public Information Officer Christy Bennett had a response. The Scott Roberts case remains an active homicide investigation. That's good to hear, because they're not pushing it into a cold case. Of course, we're just a year past it, so it might be just a little early for that. Several new detectives have been assigned to the case to review evidence, case files, and witness statements. Detectives continue to follow up on new leads and spend every available hour of every week trying to identify new information that can be followed up on. So even at this point, I'm getting the sense from Officer Bennett here that the information well is running dry. It's almost like they're looking for, to develop these new leads for them to then go and investigate. Scott Roberts was complicated. Interesting statement. Scott Roberts was complicated and many possibilities exist. We will continue to explore all possibilities and leads as they are identified. TAPD has determined there are at least one, possibly two persons that have further information concerning this case. So they're dropping a little bit there. And the way they're putting that out, I think they're trying to reach that one or two particular people and let them know that, hey, you know, we kind of got a little feeling about you guys out there. TAPD urges anyone with information regarding Scott to please come forward and speak with detectives. Although it may seem insignificant, it quite possibly could bring justice to Scott Roberts. Now, Sean isn't the only one that is upset. John Roberts is Scott and I believe Sean's father. Yes, I have become very disappointed as to the outcome of this whole investigation of Scott Roberts' death. It has been over a year now, and we feel no closer to getting this homicide resolved. It is past time to call in more outside help. I feel we've been totally kept in the dark. Captain Harrison has talked to me, Scott's father, only once. And that was when we as a family requested a meeting to try to find out any information and to see what direction they were going with their investigation. We, Scott's mom, dad, brother, just need some answers. It's getting to the point where it is unbearable. Not only did we lose a son, we also have not been able to have visitation with our grandson, Scott's 11-year-old son, Jet, in over a year. His mother, Kelly, refuses to let us have any type of contact with him. Pray that this all comes to an end soon. We get some kind of answers and can soon get to see our grandson, Jet Roberts. So another tragedy kind of in the tragedy as well. And keep in mind, these comments are from 1 year after. So we're looking back at 2016. I don't know if that situation is still the same as of right now. A year later, pilot's death still unsolved. The crime remains unsolved, but police have not given the murder cold case status. Our investigators pour every ounce of professionalism and thoroughness into this case, just as they do any homicide investigation, Christy Bennett said. All evidence, information, leads, and tips have been followed up on immediately. Several suspects have been developed throughout the year, and extensive investigations are ongoing to determine their innocence or guilt, Bennett said. So they do have a pool of people. We have no idea who those people are. We have no idea about their connection to Scott. And that's one of those things, like if some information could be released that could ask the right question of the public, could that help that proper tip get called into them that could be helpful to them? If we know that this is that one of the suspects is through a business contact, and it was for some particular industry. Obviously, he's a pilot, so maybe it would be something to do with being a pilot or around airplanes. Would just that piece of information being released by the police department in a still a controlled way, you know, hey, we're diving into Scott's professional experience and background. We're looking to hear from some people that might know something about X amount of dealings or this particular situation. Could that kind of help entice the right tips to come into them? That's what I always wonder when I'm looking at cases and I'm seeing law enforcement be so closed off to releasing any details. And I've also seen some cases where law enforcement's very good about using the anniversary as a moment to drop a new detail, and it's not always something big. In some cases, it's something as simple as the color of a vehicle or a particular make or a particular area that they found out the person was in. It's not always something that could completely jeopardize. We understand that there's a prosecution that has to happen, but some police departments are very good about understanding that the anniversary of these events is usually a very easy time to get the press re-engaged, and just some little small nugget that gets the community talking again. Isn't that what we want? Don't we want the community asking these questions again? Hey, do you remember? Were you there at this time? And kind of spinning up some talk around this case, because the details just being a man was shot in his home, is that really going to entice that type of communication? And I'm not saying there's a right or wrong. I'm just wondering. Over at TexarkanaFYI.com on August 17th, 2017, they posted something pretty interesting. And once again, kind of sounds like TAPD is tapping on someone's shoulder using these kind of press releases. They made a post on social media that almost seems like there may be some new information in the case. 25 months have passed since Scott Roberts was murdered in his home in Texarkana, Texas. This was no random act. We know that someone local knows what happened on July 2nd, 2015. Understand this. We will never stop investigating every whisper spoken and every fragment of evidence. If you know something, say something. If you did this, you know you made a mistake, and we have it. There are some things in how that's phrased that makes me wonder if there's even more. It feels like a coded message in some way. But the last sentence, pretty direct. They're saying there's some critical piece of information they have that was a mistake for this killer to have done or left behind or something along those lines. Also interesting to me that they're saying we know that someone local, like they're really calling out that this someone in this vicinity knows what happened here. And we're talking about a pilot. And I don't know much about Scott personally. Could it be that, he started an argument with someone? I mean, he's flying all around. He's visiting all these different places. But we've got TAPD being very direct here. They know that this is someone local and that they know what happened on July 2nd, 2015. Just a couple of things in how this is phrased really grabbing my attention. I just wish we had better detail to help them try to prompt that information to come back. So here we get to 3 years later, July 2018. Investigators have continued to track down leads and interview witnesses in hopes of developing a viable suspect. TAPD Captain Bobby Jordan said he and Sergeant Paul Nall traveled to Washington and presented the case to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit in Quantico, Virginia last year. During this process, I kept the Roberts family informed of our actions and met with them on a couple of different occasions, Jordan said. Although not in the sense that the family mourns their loss, our hearts and souls have been poured into solving this case for them, and we too have developed a sense of kinship with them. Solving the case just hasn't happened yet, and we will not stop following up on every rumor, hunch, lead, or shred of evidence we are made aware of. Does this mean that communication is better between the investigators and the family at this point a couple years later? We're kind of hearing it from the investigation side. I don't know for sure from the family side. And of course, I'm just going to put the offer out there for any of the family members. If you want to speak to me, if you want to do an interview, we can do that. But even if you just want to speak to me in private, please feel free to reach out to me. You can get in touch with me at john@lordenarts.com. Anything we can do to help this case, we're here for you guys. Unfortunately, not many more updates. We roll to the 4-year anniversary mark in 2019. The Scott Roberts case weighs heavy on our hearts and minds as we continue to investigate, Police Department Captain James Atchley said. Investigators continue to comb through evidence and work for ways to develop new leads. The truth is out there, and we will not rest until it is brought to light. Investigators have remained tight-lipped. That might be a little bit of an understatement. I mean, they've been extremely tight-lipped in this case, declining to say where in the residence his body was found or what type of firearm is believed to be the murder weapon. Definitely. There's a lot of missing pieces in this story. And then in 2020, we have a podcast come along, and a lot of information comes out in this podcast. Now, you guys know typically we don't go into rumor territory here on the channel, but this case has so few facts that, and quite honestly, I don't feel like a lot of the information in this podcast is rumor. I believe that Debbie Brower did do some investigative footwork. It's what she says she did in the podcast. The issue I have is Debbie is not clear about her sources. So we're going to talk about the facts that she talked about in this podcast, but I want to put a huge asterisk on this part of the conversation and just say we're treading into unconfirmed information at this point. I don't think it's bunk. I do believe that she's been in contact with family members potentially, friends potentially. There's even some things that lead me to believe that maybe she's been in contact with law enforcement or someone speaking to law enforcement around this as well. But unconfirmed information as we go into here. I wish it was confirmed, because these are the types of details that I think could be helpful if put out to the public to get those right tips called in. Obviously, that's why I'm sharing them with you guys here as we roll forward. So a big thank you to Debbie Brower and her co-host Anita Carver at the Rewind Crime podcast. Unfortunately, I don't know if it was just a false start, but they did 4 episodes and then they stopped. And I've kind of seen, podcasts do this occasionally. People try to ramp up and do a podcast. They get a couple of episodes out. They either figure out it's not for them or the workload becomes too much with their regular life or something along those lines. But I saw a lot of promise, especially for a first episode. This was a really strong first episode. Like I said, the only thing I wish they would have, even if you couldn't be exact about the sources, like you don't want to get a family member or the investigators upset with a particular family member, like just saying that this came from a family member or this came from a close family friend, this came from a report that I saw from the police department, like that would have made all the difference in the world in terms of, I think, how this information would get out there. But we're going to do our best with it here. So just going over kind of the high level of what they covered there. We've already talked about the fact there was an ex-wife, Kelly, the son, Jet. The marriage broke up. They're saying possibly due to his career aspirations, possibly due to his work as a pilot, him having to go and do all this extra education, certifications, and then literally being gone from home might have been a stress factor in the marriage breaking up. I don't know if that's really super important to this case, but I'm just trying to give you guys kind of the high points here. States that he had a small group of close friends and that he may have had 2 sides, that he was a person that didn't actually share a lot about his private life. Interesting statements. Once again, I don't know how to qualify them because I don't know where they're coming from. But I understand that, a lot of us have a small group of very close friends. That's just how we decide to be. But the thing about having 2 sides to his life is an interesting statement. I wish there was better detail on. July 1st, he spends the night with his girlfriend, a woman named Allison, at her home in Shreveport. Now, Shreveport is, I believe, I looked for a Shreveport, Arkansas. I didn't find one. There is Shreveport, Louisiana, and that's only a little over an hour's drive from his house. So I believe that that's the same Shreveport they're talking about. Allison was separated from her husband at the time and had been dating Scott for a short while. Scott left that morning, Thursday, July 2nd, I believe, went to a chiropractor appointment near his home, and then he went home. He had this big family trip planned for the 4th of July weekend, including, I think his brother was supposed to go, his cousins, his parents, and they were all going to a spot where the family had cabins and it was on a river. I don't know if this is his property in particular or if this is another property. I don't think it's super important, but essentially they're planning this big family trip, and the family had already headed there. Scott kind of got hung up because he wanted to bring Jet along with him, but there was some party that Jet wanted to go to on one day. So Scott was going to come up a day later. The family was calling Scott and just kind of checking on different aspects of the trip. And that's when they noticed all of a sudden no one could get a hold of him. So then I believe it's the following morning, July 3rd, his brother Sean does go over to his house to check on him. He sees Scott's car in the driveway. According to the podcast, Scott had a keypad entry for his home. So literally you can go up and press the right order of buttons and that would let you into the home. That's how Sean entered. He put the code in and then he goes inside. Scott is found, once again, according to the podcast, in the bedroom, lying beside his bed. He's deceased, appears to have been shot multiple times, including in both knees, his abdomen, and then even more gunshots. They didn't have any further explanation. They did say he might have been going for his own gun, which he was known to keep next to his bed. And the host kind of goes into an explanation. You know, she believes that he was kind of trying to leap across the bed as shots are being fired, and then effectively he rolls off the edge of the bed and winds up on the ground. I don't know if that's accurate. I'm just telling you what was in the podcast. So Sean calls police, calls the family. Reportedly, investigators, once again, according to the podcast, found no sign of forced entry, no fingerprints, no DNA. The podcast theorized that the perpetrator may have cleaned up. So they said that the bathroom sink was heavily dusted with fingerprint dust, looking for prints there. The only obvious sign of disruption in the home was the bed, but they did find a few shell casings. So they certainly know the caliber of the weapon. They're not releasing that information. Scott was dressed in normal clothes at the time. Key code log suggests that the killer arrived at 10:30 and left within 15 minutes. I'm not 100% sure I understand what's happening around that. If there is a key code that you're using outside to unlock your door, I don't know if the killer used that key code, or if just the fact that the door was opened is still logged, because you've got an electronic system there basically, and it's just checking, you know, every time the door is open, it's just making a little note of a door was opened here. So that's kind of a big aspect in terms of understanding, especially the makeup of the person that is coming to him. If it's someone that knew the key code, was it someone that sat on the street and had a pair of binoculars and just waited for him to enter and kind of watched what he punched in and then came in behind him and did that? Was it someone that had been to his house before that knows the key code already? I don't know. But somehow or another, using that system, they determined that they believe the killer arrived at 10:30. Once again, I believe this is July 2nd, left within 15 minutes. Debbie says that she heard from several people that Scott was a bit of a Casanova. You know, guy's single at this point. Sounds like he might have been dating around a little bit. I have seen on his Facebook page, he got like lighting added under his bed. Personally, I think it looks cool. I don't know that that's necessarily a sign of you being some type of Casanova. She states that Allison, the girlfriend that he saw on July 1st, was an initial person of interest, but she had an alibi. Now, remember, Allison has an estranged husband at this point. That it stated that he was also considered, but he also had an alibi. Scott had become close with a local restaurant owner as well. She also had an alibi, and it was also noted that she was visibly upset at his funeral. His ex-wife, Kelly, was at work at the time. She has a new husband, Joe, and apparently Joe had a rough relationship with Scott. They had words at several points. But Joe was eventually ruled out. Reportedly, he cooperated with police throughout extensive investigative efforts on their part. They were just looking every which way because it sounds like Scott's family was saying Joe is a very likely suspect in this case. But he gets ruled out. So basically, according to the podcast, that leaves this with effectively no persons of interest for the immediate circle that you would consider around Scott. Debbie states that there are rumors that Scott may have dated married women. Once again, we don't know the source, doesn't really go even further into that. So we're already in unconfirmed territory. I'm now putting out the rumor territory warning as well. So may have dated married women, may have dated people with substantial amounts of money, and may have been using illicit sites on the dark web. And I don't want to go into it much more than that. Honestly, she doesn't go into it much more than that. This is total rumor territory. I don't know if any of this plays in. This could be things that, you know, people are just theorizing, trying to explain what happened around this case. Reportedly, police were mailed an anonymous letter mentioning that there was someone local who knew who did it, but nothing came of that lead. Now, that aspect kind of lines up with the comments that we've been hearing that they've been putting out publicly. So maybe they believe that that anonymous letter was true, and then they started kind of putting that back out. Hey, we know that it's someone local. Just kind of interesting to me that we're hearing that coming from two different directions. The podcast theorizes about it being a professional hit, which, if it's true that there's no prints, no DNA, no evidence, the shell casings being left behind, not, maybe it's a professional hit, maybe it isn't, I'm not sure. But through this conversation, the host Debbie says that she does know the caliber of the weapon. She's not going to harm the investigation by sharing it, but she does say it is a smaller caliber weapon. She believes that a pro might use that because it's quieter. She also says that asking around when she was talking to people, that a neighbor said they heard what they thought were fireworks around that time, but those might have actually been the gunshots. And of course, I don't know. That's just a terrible aspect to all this. I mean, being around that particular weekend, around 4th of July weekend, you hear pops and bangs like that, and yeah, the first thing you're going to think is fireworks. If this had happened at a different time of year, that might have elicited a whole different reaction from that neighbor. Hearing that might have been enough to look out the window or to see what was going on. But the biggest thing, and once again, if this is true, we're still talking about the podcast here, Rewind Crime. According to them, Scott also had a camera in his living room, but he didn't have a subscription for that camera to keep the video stored online. What's interesting to me about that is I've looked into a lot of those types of cameras. Even if you don't have a subscription to store the video online, typically they have some amount of memory buffer. Some of them have certain time periods that are free, like they'll store like 3 days worth for free online. And then if you want the 7 days or the 30 days, you have to pay for that. It's strange to me that there would be a camera that had absolutely no memory in it. There are other cameras where you literally put the memory chip in the camera yourself. You can access those from your phone and stuff like that. And we know that police are in there. It's just outside of a 24-hour period. It's possible that this was some kind of camera that only stored literally 24 hours of information, and by the time investigators got to it, it was wiped out. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I have a lot of questions about it, and unfortunately, they didn't have much more detail. But that's kind of the biggest stuff from the podcast. I am going to have a link to it in the description box down below as well. And I kind of wish that that Debbie would keep going. For a first episode, I thought it was really strong, particularly if that information is solid. I just, once again, wish that the sources would have, at least the types of sources would have been identified. I think that would really help. But in 2019, Officer Bennett made some other comments I did want to share with you here. We grieve with the Roberts family and hope that the one lead needed to solve this case happens soon. Bennett said investigators are actively following the trails of suspects who have been developed since the killing. And I don't know if those are suspects, persons of interest that we've just talked about from the podcast, or if that's a whole different round of people. I have no idea. But that's about it for this case. There's just not a ton of information out there. Web sleuths, there's literally 3 posts. We've covered all the information from those here. Reddit, it wasn't even worth showing you guys. There was literally 2 posts. Neither of them had anything to do with the actual case. Facebook, Scott Roberts. Here is a picture of Big Sky. And he actually had an area out there that he called Jets Falls. And if anything, I'd say come to this Facebook site. Of course, I'll have a link to that down below as well. Take a look through the friends and family and what they're missing since Scott's been gone. And maybe that can help entice someone to pick up that phone and do the right thing in this case. At the TAPD's website, they put out their own message, very direct message, back on the 4th anniversary. God be with Scott Roberts' family, friends, and loved ones, especially on this date. And I just want to take a moment and second that, because here we are 6 years after the fact, and this family is still facing no answers. May he impress upon the hearts of those that have knowledge of this crime to come forward so that healing can begin. May the guilt of those involved in this heinous crime bear down so heavily upon them that they can no longer withstand its weight. Another thing you'll see at the Facebook page, pictures of Scott and his son, Jet. It's really, really heartbreaking. Over here at issue.com, they have a letter that was written to them by two of Scott's cousins, and I just wanted to share it a little bit with you. I mean, when we don't have as many facts to focus on with the case, I think we should focus on the person, and I think this is a great way to do that by sharing just a little bit from this letter. Not only were the holidays special, every day was interesting with you around. Do you remember how OCD you were about having things perfect in your room, your closet, and ultimately your house? Your clothes were always color coordinated. The hangers were even color coordinated. They had to hang the correct way or you were not happy. All of your food was organized in the kitchen. We would come in and move things around just to see if you noticed, and you always did. Maybe that is what struck us so much about the day you were killed. Everything was in place like usual. Except you. Going to space camp when you were in high school stoked the flames to become a pilot to a fevered pitch. Although you took some turns throughout your life, you always went back to that goal. We remember that you worked at Home Depot for a while, where you learned how to be so handy, which allowed you to help fix things in our homes and anyone's house that asked for your help. You even flipped a house and remodeled 2 homes. They were beautiful. But again, your intent was to fly. So eventually that's the direction you went. You would have given the shirt off your back to help any of your friends. We know that you wanted so much to be even more. You would buy your clothes at a resale shop so that you could have designer clothes at a lesser cost. You definitely had a love for finer things and were very frugal. We always thought that was funny because we never cared, but you did. You wanted to be somebody, and you would have been. When Jet was born, everyone in the family was overjoyed. He was such a beautiful baby, and both Kelly and you were ecstatic. But after his birth, as with many marriages, things happen. Divorce is never a good thing, but it does happen. We felt so bad for all of you, and especially for Jet. You would be so proud of the young man he's becoming. He has grown so much and is a smart, talented student who's doing well now. We were excited when you went to work for Wholesale Electric as their pilot. The McCulloughs were so happy with you as their pilot. They have been supportive of our efforts to find out who killed you. We all would love to have that closure. It's been especially difficult on your mom, Betty, who has changed so much since that day. As for all of your family, we miss you so much. We miss your smile. We miss your laugh and your ability to make us laugh. We miss your kindness and helpfulness. We wish you were here. Whatever happened, we will never forget you and will never stop trying to find out what happened on July 2nd, 2015. We love you, love your cousins, Kim Kinder and Summer Nelson. Now, Kim Kinder did start a GoFundMe. That's how they raised the $10,000 for the reward fund. Of course, I wanted to donate to this. I found out a couple weeks ago, some of these GoFundMes, I don't know if they kind of age out, but they effectively stop working. And unfortunately, that's the case with this one as well. I tried to make a donation and it's telling me that donations have been paused on this. If it does open back up, if the family lets me know about it, of course, we'll make a donation there. But it's unfortunate because I really wanted to help. And also just to nudge them, I saw some articles where they were saying it's so amazing that people are still giving into the reward fund to help us in this way. I just kind of wanted to send another little reminder of that, but hopefully they'll see this video and know that there's people out here that still care and are looking for justice with them. And speaking of Kim, here is a comment from her.
Would be very, very, very grateful if we could figure out who did this and have justice served, because somebody out there is walking around free that should not be.
Scott Roberts had turned 40 only 3 months before this happened. And there's a post on his Facebook page, and I want to share part of that with you. He actually took a moment to reflect on his life and to see that it's one of the last kind of significant posts that he makes on his page. It's in one way heartbreaking, but in another way very fitting, and I think you'll see why. 40 years. My, where does the time go? As I reflect back on the short time I've spent on this giant spinning rock, one thing comes to mind: love. It's so complicated, yet so simple. First off, I'd like to tell my mom and dad, thank you and I love you. I understand the sacrifices you have made to help make me the man I am today, and the love that was behind each action you took. The same goes for God. I haven't always listened very well to what the three of you have tried to tell me and teach me over the years, but as I've gotten older, the advice has finally started to sink in. I guess it's better late than never, huh? I've had the privilege of meeting a lot of wonderful people in my first 40 years. I think back on those that I grew up with, friends and family members, and the love that I carry in my heart for each of them. Some I see on a regular basis, and some I've not seen in decades. To be honest with you, I don't really express to them just how grateful I am to have them in my life and just how much love I have for them. I also think about the ones who are no longer in my life and the ones that I have yet to cross paths with. So, thank you all for the birthday wishes, but as my one wish on my 40th birthday, I pray each and every one of you take the time today to tell those in your life you love them. I feel like just about every episode we do here on the channel is a little reminder to me to let people in my life know how much I love them. I hope you guys do too. That's it, Brain Scratchers. Let's talk about this case in the comments down below. As always, I ask that we remain respectful to each other, of course, but also to the case, to the family. There's a very good chance, I'm pretty certain, that the family is going to see this video. So let's make sure when they look in the conversation down there that it's helpful to them as well. And of course, respectful to everything that they're going through. And once again, to the family, anything that we can do, please feel free to reach out to me, and we will certainly work to make that happen. Before I end today's video, I want to thank some people that are helping to support us here at Lord and Arts. Big thank you to new patrons Elaine Schor, thank you Tracy Combs, Rain Fall, and a big thank you to Jen Faltz for increasing her pledge. If you'd like to support the channel, please visit lordandarts.com, where you can sign up for Patreon, sign up for PayPal, buy merchandise, or even just buy us a coffee like Marie Conant recently did. We don't have a video coming out on Monday. Christy and I are going to take the day off. We hope that you have a safe and happy 4th of July if you celebrate it here in the US. And if you don't, I hope you have a wonderful weekend in the rest of the world. Take care, everybody. Please remember to help us raise exposure to this case by sharing this video if you have friends in Arkansas. I'd also say let's throw Louisiana and even East Texas in there as well. We really need your help to make sure that we're helping this family as much as we can. Take care, and I'll see you again here on the Lord and Arts channel next Wednesday.